Rip,
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
not wearing a red shirt today?
Oh, it's got red and blue. I mean, there's a little,
Well, I can't see. I'm too old. I can barely operate this machine. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Let's go ahead and do call to order and roll call. So I'm going to start by saying your name. If you can make sure that your mic is on, please, and just confirm that you are in our presence. We'll start with you, Trip Straub,
I am present. Thank you.
Kathy Anderson. Here. Tammy Waldman. Here. Alex Berger.
Here.
Julie Blackerby here. Hummer is not here yet. And Susan Busey, not here yet as well. And the staff that we have in the room, Gary Carter,
Here.
David Gibson,
He's here.
Bridget McAndrew,
Here.
Myron Burr.
Here.
That concludes our roll call. We, in moving forward, there is a consideration of minutes. Everyone should have received our minutes from the February 12th meeting. Does anyone have any changes or anything that they would like to address within the minutes? Minutes are approved. And we're going to start the meeting with a staff presentation.
Thank you, Julie. I think at the last meeting, you kind of charged everyone with bringing up event plan ideas. So I wanted to go ahead and kick this off by giving the board a presentation of what we normally present to the mayor, city council this time of year in order to get their input and feedback on our event planning for the upcoming next year before the budgeting processes start. So this is in a similar format that we've done in the past with the city council. So I'll just go through that. And then I think after the conclusion of that, we can talk about whether this group wants to alter or change or have some new events they would rather offer instead of these, but just something to get us started in that vein. So this is the staff recommendation for events next year. We try to build all our events around the event goals that the city council established a couple of years ago, developing civic pride, promoting diversity and a sense of welcoming in Clayton, spotlighting local businesses in the special business district, encouraging activity, accessibility, and healthy environment, and celebrating vibrancy, and create a festive environment in downtown Clayton. And then we also create a scorecard that we'll talk about here in a few minutes to see how we do, at least we think that we do when the events do take place. So this is the event calendar for this year. This is not only economic development and special business district events. This is parks, Century Foundation, everything that's going on in Clayton. So as you can see, we do a number of those events. The events that we will be discussing here in a few minutes are the BOLD events. Those are all funded through the Special Business District Fund, with the exception of the block parties, which is a general fund of expense because they do happen outside of the Special Business District. And so this is the tentative calendar for next year, very similar to what you just saw for this current year. When we do our events, we market them in this format. We use the city website, the events calendar. We use the Clayton Connection, the weekly e-newsletter. several social media platforms. In some of our events, we also contract with influencers, social media influencers. Alexis Zotos was one that we used recently for Restaurant Week, and we've used a couple other different ones in the past also. And then Kristen, who is with us today, Kristen Bryant, there is our event specialist. She also tries to get those placed on the online community calendars throughout the town too. For some of the print, we obviously do it in our own newsletter. We use banners at City Hall, Shaw Park, and Oak Knoll. Some of the events we use yard signs for, posters distributed to businesses. We try to do cross promotion with the Coffee with a Cop and the information at the different ward coffees. And then we also try to partner with the school district in particular about promoting some of our events too, to reach the families. So the first event, Day of the Dead, came to life a couple years ago. It was a celebration of the Hispanic culture. It is started off very small the first year. And it was its first year. The next year we tried to grow it a little bit. Unfortunately, the weather didn't cooperate, cold and very rainy. So I don't think that was a great sample size. And unfortunately, that's the nature of outdoor business or outdoor events, is that you're always going to be subject to the weather. So we're proposing that we give this one another try. We're increasing the size fairly significantly this year to add more music and other components to draw hopefully more attendance too. Most of our events like this, you're going to see the current location is the 10 north block of Brentwood, and we're not the city people. The 10 north block of Brentwood is Oceano block of Brentwood between Forsyth and Maryland. We used to do a lot of things over at Chronolet Plaza, but the good and the bad is the median is very aesthetically pleasing. The bad is it is a logistic nightmare, trip hazards, cords, all kinds of things. So we kind of abandoned that spot. I've put the budget on there. We partner with Hispanic Festivals, who does the Day of the Dead events all over through town. They're kind of experts on this. And then the marketing, rentals, those are for like stages, electricity, that type of logistics. We think this aligns with the strategic goals by promoting diversity and a sense of welcoming in Clayton, trying to add some vibrancy to downtown. One of our driving factors in doing these events, till such time that we have several entertainment places going on in downtown Clayton, we're trying to artificially create that with these temporary events to drive people into Clayton that normally may not come here and see what else we have. The next one we'll talk about, but it is not special business district funded. This is general fund funded, and these are block parties, which was essentially a recommendation of the city council a couple years ago, trying to take these events that we do exclusively downtown into the neighborhoods. They are smaller in nature. They take place at like DeMund Park and Taylor Park up here in up the street from all here, kind of family oriented games for the children. But we do have such things as like an adult beverage trailer that comes into much smaller attendance on these two. And again, here's the alignment with the strategic goals that we think we're meeting, the community well-being, civic pride, trying to promote the inclusiveness of the event and this is a new one that we're proposing for this year, kind of a central social series. It's kind of a modern take of the parties in the park for those that event unfortunately kind of stayed the same for several years, and I think had ran its course. So we're trying to make some changes to kind of have a place for young professionals to go early afternoon before town to encourage. Want to talk a little bit more about it, Kristen?
Can everybody hear me? Sure. So think of Central Social Series. Hi, I'm Kristen Bryant, by the way. Think of Central Social Series along the line of an event that not only caters to those young professionals that we're trying to keep for the third hour or like the third location for them after work, but also to those luxury condos and residentials, towers that are also within the downtown business district area. So we're trying to find ways to get them to come out. A lot of those could probably work from home. So getting them out to enjoy some just fun times in downtown Clayton. So we're trying to go more of a sophisticated urban oasis. So contract with a local party rental supply company that has beautiful umbrellas, nice table settings, just to really make it feel like it's something that was already there, that fits the Clayton clean and green aesthetic that I think would fit really well. Also partnering with the local business and restaurants and retailers, finding ways to get them out of their brick and mortar to do maybe like some demos, some sample tasting, some pairings, getting creative with some of the other restaurants. And yeah, so just really a fun event that happens, I believe, 5 times over the year. First one starting in fall. The theme would be seasonal. So we would start with an October, April, the renewal, May, the bloom, June, the solstice, September, the glow, October, the harvest. And yeah, so it's
Yeah, and this one's a little bit different in the fact that this is a repeatable event, kind of add a dimension that people know that they can count on this particular time through the summer into the fall, something going on in Clayton as opposed to a one and done type of event or like our music and wine or jazz festival.
Let me ask you a question. So for the happy hour series, is it a situation where there's tents that are selling beverages, or are people bringing their own, or how does that look?
Yeah, no, we would have a couple beverage vendors participating with the tent, even contracting with the rental company to have a nice little stand with like florals and wood and all that, to where we would have like a mini bar back, even a sample station. So yes, we would be contracting with local restaurants and local vendors to come out and supply those.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and they would be at cost, obviously. It wouldn't be for free.
Yeah.
On as far as the drinks and such, during the art fair, like Ivy and Oceano can't sell me a glass of wine and let me take it out on the street.
Correct.
You're not going to do that for these events, are you?
So we would have to get creative, I think, with permitting there, but what we do for Music and Wine Festival and Jazz Festival is we do work with vendors. So like Oceano, as a specific vendor to that event, does come out and can sell cocktails.
Okay.
They just have to provide all the proper permitting and licensing for that. So yes, we'd be willing to work with those restaurants within that area, or whoever wants to participate and can participate, to come out and sell cocktails on the street, but we would just need to make sure that they have the proper permitting and licensing.
Kathy, so the difference between these events and the art fairs, that's a separate organization that does. rely on that,
Okay.
alcohol sale for revenue. Um, um, we're spending money for marketing Clayton, so, uh, not necessarily the revenue concern is more that Julie or Amr, ultimately we get to it. We, on all of our events, we invite the restaurants and retailers. Some are easier to get their participation than others. And then have no takers, we usually contract with like that trailer I was talking about that we use at.
Kristen, will this just be like a part, like a half block, or what are you thinking? Like
Yeah, just between Forsyth and Maryland.
but would it be that whole block?
Probably for the time being, not the whole block. I mean, one of the alleyways would be open for access for deliveries, obviously. But as if the event continues and it just keeps growing, then, that might be another conversation to expand it.
Okay.
We've learned that with the Music and Wine and Jazz Festival on
Yeah.
Brentwood. It's such.
Gary, can you talk quick? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. We've learned that lesson with the Music and Wine and the Jazz Festival, in that we don't want to seem so spacious that it looks empty. So as the event grows, we just move further back into the block. But
Mhm.
For sure.
for
Yeah.
traffic safety, we have to close the whole block, but we may or may not necessarily use it for the first time.
Yeah.
We'd rather look crowded
Yeah.
than spacious.
Is
Mhm.
the idea to always have it on Central, or would, one time be Central, one time be Merrimack, one time be Brentwood in that same block I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, I think what we've learned with our events, and what I think I witnessed with the latter days of the parties in the park, is that we want to maintain a constant location. So people can count on it, know where it is, and make plans to get there. I think at least in my mind trip, it's a mistake to move something like this around, just because then I think you're playing with losing some of your audience if you do that.
Yeah, and that's why I'm looking, and as I look at the special business district map, Merrimack would be pretty much the most central. So Central Ave is just, kind of a block off. So I'm thinking of all the office workers that you want to attract, not just the residents, having it more central, which would be Merrimack. Now, again, I don't know the traffic differences between Central Merrimack and Brentwood.
Yeah, the alleys have a little bit different traffic pattern, and that alley that lets out on the Merrimack is kind of a major, I don't want to say major thoroughfare because that's a defined term, but it has a lot more traffic. It related to those new office towers that went up,
Mhm.
where the central alleys are more residential traffic with Ceylon and Bemiston Place that are used to accessing those garages from that side.
Mhm.
No other questions, I'll go ahead and move it forward. Again, we've outlined why we think it aligns with the strategic goals of the city, trying to create that vibrant downtown, activating public places, and trying to draw those people that may not typically stay after work in Clayton for a little bit longer to see what's going on. This is Clayton Restaurant Week. We do a summer and winter edition. It's in coordination with the restaurants. Obviously, we have someone here that may be able to speak from that side of it. But this is typically during their slower seasons. It's a prefix menu for certain dollar amount. It is by far one of the more successful events that we do each year, just because it's relatively minimal investment with a huge impact for the restaurants. And again, alignment with the strategic goals that we've outlined here. I won't take the time to read them, but it's in the presentation. So this is kind of a sampling of what we actually do for the marketing with Clayton Restaurant Week. As you can see, as I referenced earlier, our use of influencers outpaced anything that we were able to do on our own with following. So a little bit more direct action link clicks through our channels than she did, but I think people get the message from her reels that she did on social media. You can see that we had quite a bit of shares through her channel. And again, I think we've covered this earlier, but some of the things that we do as far as marketing and so forth. One of the things that we're adding for this year is a weather contingency. I think it was actually Amr who brought this up to my attention because during this past winter Clayton Restaurant Week, we had a snowstorm, which kind of put a hamper on I think it was the beginning or the end. I don't remember. Beginning. So we're having a contingency plan to following week if need be. Music and Wine is one of the events that's been relatively successful for quite a few years now. Again, it was one of those that started on Carondelet Plaza. We've moved it to Brentwood. Here in the past few years, it is simply just that, music and wine. So we have different genres of music that Kristen contracts with, and we invite Missouri wineries and Clayton wine stores to set up, in addition to restaurants that come up there. But this has been highly successful. It even attracts Alex most years.
I only go if the mayor invites me.
Okay. We'll see what we can do about that. It is a one-day event outside, so we don't necessarily have a contingency plan if weather strikes us. Fortunately, I don't think this one has been struck by weather yet. So
Great for the restaurants. It is.
and again, we try to equate this all back to the strategic goals that the city council gave us a couple of years ago. Clayton Jazz Festival, there's a very similar format to the Music and Wine. We try not to fix something that's not broken. So it's a cut and paste, basically, but a very specific genre. We have been fortunate since the beginning to partner with the Silverman Brothers, who are Grammy Award winners in their field, to help us bring that on. They bring other Grammy Award winning musicians to Clayton for nothing for our part. It's all friends helping friends on that piece of it. So the expenses CUC associated with that are the logistics, stage, and that type of stuff. So, and again, very successful, at least in my mind. So this is the event scorecard that I referenced a little bit earlier. We use each of the goals that were handed to us and try, at least in our mind, Kristen minds, to identify what goals we think we're hitting and which goals that we necessarily did not hit. We try to estimate attendance. This is just that, just an estimate. If you are seeing event attendance that gives you a hard and fast number that was not a ticketed event, it's just an estimate. So it's just that. And then we also put it in a cost per attendee in a field there also. And this is just so you give you an idea of what the cost per attendee looks like. These are kind of national averages here. So depending on the size of the festival, obviously, and the intensity of the logistics that go into it.
So do you take that chart there and decide which, based on your previous chart, which events to cancel?
Yeah, we do but with the caveat, Trip, that one of the events may have been subject to weather. And then, unfortunately, a lot of the expenses incurred whether anyone comes or you have it or not. So there's no pullback at any point in time. In order to affect that, we would have to cancel it 2 or 3 weeks in advance, unfortunately. So we do make that a recommendation if an event has a continued history of being a high cost per attendee. That's obviously a recommendation to discontinue, but we like to get at least a sample size that doesn't include extreme weather or the first year before we make that recommendation. Again, this is just the other factors that go into the cost per attendee. So that's my show, Julie.
Awesome. Thank you. So last week we had talked about everyone kind of coming up with ideas, things that could potentially be low cost and implemented rather immediately, medium cost, high cost, kind of a immediate, intermediate, and then longer term ideas. So maybe we can start with those and decide where to go. Cami, would you start?
So I just kind of came up with threw a few ideas out there. But one I think that we could focus on a lot is just like social media in general, and doing like maybe business spotlights or restaurant spotlights, like one a week or something like that. I know, like my demographic, my age group and younger and some older really do use like Instagram and social media to see what's going on. I know, Bridget, when you post all your stuff, like I always see that. But I just think that's important to really hopefully like it's free advertisements for our businesses. So I thought that would be something really quick and easy we could do. Another thing is like, could we do something with like WashU student event, like having them, come to our downtown, maybe like at the beginning of the school year, just kind of like during some of their events, just ask them to come here and provide some sort of something, incentive wise to get them down here. Because from what I understand, they're not coming downtown like at all.
It's funny you say that because I just had a meeting with Placer AI, which is a tracking company for all those apps that you have on your phone and you blindly agree to. They're on the back end tracking you. And so, not you specifically, I don't know. I can't see that. But so I had them pull up Sushi AI as an example of the tool. And an overwhelming majority, if not all, of the traffic associated with that was coming from WashU, SLU University, and UMKC.
I can't believe they're.
I mean, UMSL.
Yeah, I figured you meant. I figured you meant UMSL. Yeah.
That's a little bit of a drive from UMKC, but you know what I meant. Not Columbia, Missouri. So they are coming here, but
That's
it
the
is
newer one, right? Like
that?
like the shuttle doesn't even come
no
to downtown.
It's all driving,
Right.
Because I also do parking, and I can tell you about the parking situation around there too.
Right.
But yeah, so they are coming.
Yeah.
It's just identifying something that matches that synergy with something like that in order to get them here more.
Right. So that was just another idea. And you talked about closing down the streets. We were just at Maryland Walk building last night, and a lot of the residents there were saying that. So I think that would be great for the urban oasis or whatever. And then, I heard a lot even like when I was like going door to door during campaigning was like beautification of our downtown and like what that could look like. So I don't know if we like, if residents want to take part in like planters or business take planters or competitions or something like that, but just something that, would hopefully like make our streets more beautiful. Do we still do the movie night at the firehouse?
I feel like we just stopped. Didn't it just stop like in the last year?
I know they pared it down to just one event every year.
Okay.
And this past year it was scheduled around tornado time.
Oh,
So it
okay.
was canceled. So.
I just remember that was really fun. Like when my kids were younger, we always attended those. And if we could do something like that. And then just over that, like the winter holiday, like a shopping weekend, something that we could like, bring again, people. Again, this is all it needs to be, doesn't need to be like expensive, but just like bringing awareness through social media and things like that. If the shops could somehow coordinate and just, do something with the holiday shopping one weekend. I know that like Webster and Kirkwood do something similar and it gets me out there. And so I think that's pretty successful from that standpoint. That's all I have right now.
I love it.
Good list.
I'll add more to that once it comes around to me.
I love the back to school party. I think that's great. And we live on Central, and so I do see a lot of WashU students on Central. And I do, whoever does the flowers, I want to do a shout out for them because I think some of the planters in downtown Clayton are really beautiful. Now I totally forgot what I was going to say. One of the things for park, two things. I know the one thing for the basketball games last week. I really watched to see what kind of draw we had in Clayton, and I'm sure we did, but we didn't see people walking around in Purdue shirts or anything like that. And I just wonder when there's major events like that, like we had talked about the Olympic soccer and football, in the summertime and all, how do we draw folks here and how do we celebrate with everybody? I mean, there were so many parties going on last week. And when you walk around Clayton, I didn't really see a whole lot. Now, I might have missed it. And I don't know how the restaurants did with folks. Did we?
I think one of them, I'm confident that our hotels did well because our hotels always do well.
Right.
Our hotels are a fairly much a staple for those coming to the St. Louis region. The component that we are missing for that particular target audience is a sports bar.
Sports bar. Yeah,
What?
we need a sports bar.
Oh, yeah, good call. Yeah.
Because that,
Because
I
our
think-
old sports bars are all gone.
yeah, we don't have Fields or any of the other ones anymore. I mean, CJ Muggs, but that's really not even a sports specific bar.
The game there, and there were a lot of people that are old like me watching it.
Right. Still
Yeah.
fans,
But
but I mean, that's the component that we could really use is that type of venue in order to attract during those type of events, like the basketball and the football this summer or soccer or whatever. But also those young professionals that work in Clayton, because, I think 801 Chop House is great and Oceano is great, but you're probably not going to wear your jersey in there and hang out with your
right,
friends.
right, you're right, you're right.
Right. Just to quickly add to that point, like when we were on vacation, my son wanted to watch the World Baseball Classic and we were literally looking for restaurants that had TVs in them. And so we were just aiming for that. And so I think that's a very
Yeah,
valid
that's a
point.
good call.
Yeah.
Okay, well then we need a sports bar. Then parking, and I know that's a huge problem. We were just in Dallas a couple weeks ago, and there's valet parking everywhere in Dallas. The shopping malls have valet parking. And we have all these banks and other assorted places, Centene, et cetera, that have these empty garages at night. And I just wonder if there's a way for the city and some of these empty garages to cooperate so that, and we could have St. Louis parking, we could have somebody that they really trust, be the valet people and all. But I mean, it's not like we don't have a garage on almost every block. It's just that nobody's allowed to use it. So I wonder, I mean, this valet parking everywhere was just amazing. And I hadn't paid any attention before because I wasn't involved with this, but every restaurant, and I'm sorry Amr isn't here. I don't know why Amr got rid of his valet parking. But
Well, I mean, the
do you know
current,
why?
no, I don't. I couldn't speak. I mean, it may not be being utilized because of density issues. I mean, the current system here in Clayton is that generally any restaurant can have a valet spot if they so choose to. And a numerous of those that do have a valet do contract with private lots, like Napoli uses a
Right.
private lot and so forth, and some of the other restaurants do too. So
Well,
that's the current situation where it is business driven.
Well, and
If we didn't want to even do the valet parking, is there any way to make some of these like Commerce Bank garage available to folks at night? We walk to Avenue, but sometimes, finding a place to park over at Avenue, because my husband doesn't always walk, right, Alex? He can't find a place, and so, and there's garages everywhere.
Well, and I think, Kathy, I think that's a really good point. That was the thing I was gonna talk about was parking. And I can't even take credit for this idea because another resident brought it to me, but they went to Naples, I think it was Naples, somewhere in Florida. And there's like, in the center of Naples, or kind of the center of downtown, you can just pull up to, it's almost like a valet station. So it's really for the whole downtown. And you're still gonna have to walk a little bit, but at least like you're a couple blocks from maybe, I don't know if it's somewhere like down Merrimack a little bit, because then you're at least close to some places. I that's like more difficult for like, Napoli's further, but some sort of centralized location. And I think actually that will be more key. We potentially are going to have this new music venue, that could seat 100 to 200 people every couple hours. Like where are they going to park at night? So thinking about some sort of centralized location, again, you're going to have to walk a little bit, but if you can't find a parking spot, you pull up to this place, pay $5, whatever it is. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if Naples contracts with it or if, you just offer a space to a company like St. Louis Valet, whatever it is, and say, can you set up shop here? Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but because I'm a little worried once this Mr. Myers Vinyl Lounge opens, like you said, I don't know where they're going to park. But if they could partner with like, Forsyth Point and Commerce, like have 50 spots,
Well, see, that's the other thing too, is those lots, for instance, Forsyth Point, that is public parking at night.
yeah.
So when you want to go to Avenue, if you park in that new office building, it's public parking.
It is?
Yeah,
I know that.
pretty much all these garages are. I think the issue is that it's not well advertised, or there's a small P on a sign that nobody really notices because it blends in with all the rest of the signs. So, at night, what would probably be most effective is if, I don't know what this would look like, but if the city had some standardized lit public parking sign that was on those garages. So, and those after normal office hour times when it's just open to public parking, that people can more easily identify that. At night, you'll never see those black poles that we have with a little P on it outside of one of those and think, oh, that's a public parking garage, I'm going to go in there. If something was lit up and said public parking on these garages at night, I think that solves most of that issue, because all of those garages, for the most part, you can go park in the Centene garage at night and go down to Osteria or whatever you want to do.
We could
You
have
go to
some
Forsyth
neon
Point and do the same
signs.
thing. So,
Put up some cute neon signs. Alex would love that. Like,
but you see that in other places and it's effective. I mean, you go downtown Columbia, Missouri, and there's lit neon looking public parking signs on public parking or
Yeah.
facilities that offer public parking. And that's the kind of thing that special business district, if these funds are going to be used within that particular area, SPD could even pay for the signage and cover part of the installation to help identify those parking
Rather do
garages.
that than the Hispanic festival. I mean, I think that's, I'm shocked. That's
I agree with
great
that.
to know. We tried to do a girls' dinner at Oceano and two people said they were coming from, out in Frontenac or someplace, I don't know. And they said, there's no place for me.
Yeah,
There's
much-
2,400 spaces in the garage on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
Is it on our website too? Because I know we have like on our websites like parking, and then you like try to look at anything and it doesn't.
It is. and
really go anywhere.
We'll update it from time to time. The issue is not many people, most people get down here and then they try to figure out where to park, or they just,
Right.
they punch into GPS. Now I'm in downtown Clayton and I know where the restaurant is and I just need to know where to park. And the GPS or Google Maps or whatever isn't really going to show you where that public parking is. But if
Yeah, I
it
mean,
was lit,
being in
you
the-
could see it everywhere. I mean, that's
Right. I just know like when you're kind of, I mean, I'm a planner. So like when I go to somewhere, I'm thinking, where am I going to park? And I like look at, I go on their website and check it out. I'd be like, where is public parking? Just to be safe and all the things. So maybe in addition to like the signage, if we could like put that on our website.
we're
'cause to me
working with the businesses so they have it on their websites.
Okay.
Because I don't think a lot of people, if I was going to go to a restaurant in Kirkwood, I don't know that I would go to Kirkwood's website to figure out where to park. But if I'm on that website for the restaurant, making that reservation, and
Right.
there's something there that says you can park at this location that's closest. And then when you're there on the ground, it's lit up and you can see, okay,
Yeah.
there it is. You've kind of simplified that whole process. I think it's probably a minimal investment that would solve a lot of this really misconception that's out there that there's no public parking at night. It's actually all over the place. People just don't know where it is if they're not familiar with the
Yeah, and
area.
I think that's the difference between the Naples.
Yeah,
That's where it was.
right. And that's what,
Because the parking is not,
there's no
I'm-
garages.
yeah, there's no garages. So
Yeah.
we have parking everywhere. It's just because we're in the Midwest and no one's used to parking in a parking garage that are coming from Frontenac.
Well, and that's the problem because people say to us, I don't like parking in a garage. And I mean, but that's, again, that's the way it goes.
Is
Like,
there a way to put that on the building owners to say, if we come up with a standard sign, but for them to have to pay for that?
Would be great if they would.
I mean, is there something like we could say like we're requiring that now, that if you have public parking available, that you have to have a sign?
Then they wouldn't have public parking available.
We can,
Well, I
we
don't,
can, we can
First
require for
Amendment.
new development, but for
Right.
existing buildings, I don't know how we could require them to do it. So if there was some way to,
I don't think we can force language
right.
like
I
that.
also feel like it should be super consistent.
I
When
agree.
people
I agree.
Standard.
A standard, like a standard fun light that honestly sticks
I
out
think-
and
I
shows
think you're right.
people.
Have it be
Yeah.
fun, Bridget. Yeah, I'm the exact opposite of you. I just wing everything. So I would come in and be driving around just looking for somebody.
Yeah,
tell
me too.
Here's a cute sign. Okay, that's where I come from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of that stuff, 100%. I think as I was thinking through this project, parking was at the top of my list because it's the number one thing I hear, which is can't find parking, scared to come here, don't know where to park. I'm an old person. I don't know how to work these machines, and so even though we have the parking, it remains an issue because no one knows how to use it. So I think if we had not only signs for the evening that lit up, but also daytime signs, I think we could do a lot better just with our signage in general, for parking being number one. But then I think to Kathy's point, a lot of what she's touched on is like signage for like events, whether it's, I think the standard signage could be, pole signage, which is what the Clayton Business District, really is and what it represents. But it could be, switched out a lot for festive things. The Cardinals, the Blues, promotions for different festivals that are coming up within the city of Clayton. And I think one city that does that really well is Webster Groves. They always have the signs up and they have them on every street and they have them really pretty present, where you're not going to miss them.
Can I just say,
You're referring to streetlight banners?
yeah, that's what I was
Okay.
going to ask. Yeah, I said, okay.
Yeah, I think something that simple and low cost could
Yeah.
help to really raise awareness.
And on a few corners or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
That's one
totally.
thing that I really noticed with the basketball games. It was like Clayton didn't want to know that we have all these folks in from all over the country to go to the basketball games. And, I know Purdue brought, a gazillion people because they were so close. And somebody else was really close that came in. But we didn't have any welcome signs, we just hadn't thought about it, but maybe we can start thinking
Yeah.
banners or something.
And then with the parking, you know, if the city of Clayton ever would be able to contract with one of the garages and do like free parking from 5 to 10 PM or something, you know, I think that's another thing that Kirkwood does well is they have their parking is huge signs with it, but then it says like free parking on the garage, which is even less intimidating. Now, I think the cost of parking is secondary to just people knowing that they can
Yeah, I
park
do
there
too.
anyway.
But-
I think the cost is kind of whatever, but it's just the anxiety and the fear that people have about coming to Clayton and parking. And even Clayton residents who have been in Clayton for a long time, especially if they're a little bit older, they have a lot of fear of parking in downtown Clayton.
I think it's fair for us to approach the business-owned garages for the purpose of free parking. It's like going to them and asking for a donation because the Centene building is free for the art fair. And obviously, the art fair has the greatest population in downtown Clayton of any of our special events. And they're coming from all over the place. So just a thought about that. I guess I'm the luckiest person in America because I always park in front of the restaurants that I go to. 6:30, the Andersons go at 9:30 at night. I'm 6:30.
It's a bigger issue. I think parking's a really big issue during the day.
I agree. I
Yeah.
think it's a topic that needs to be addressed with some outcome that really is beneficial and marketable to the events, which in essence means our social media, come and park. We have new ideas for parking, you know, something like that. People get off on that.
Yeah. And I'll say, to Cammie's point too, is social media was one thing that I wanted to also bring up because I feel like we have a lot of room for, like Kristen will be out and about, you know, around restaurant week and stuff, doing videos and taking photos and posting things, but there's a rather inconsistent, like, you know, and I'm sorry, Kristen, because I don't know if you handle fully the social media or not.
She does not.
Okay, good. And of course, it's great, but I just think it could be better. It could be more engaging. We could have, you know, there's just ways that we could really try to optimize that to spread the word. On half of these events, I never even know they're taking place. You know, I don't know where you necessarily see that information, but oftentimes I don't see it. And so I don't even notice until I see the street being blocked off at like Brentwood or whatever. So I think just in general, you know, more posts, more connection, especially because we have a whole lot going on. And I think in particular for the things that welcome people outside of Clayton, you know, really pushing that out through social media because everyone is always looking for something to do, especially if it's a free event. And they'll come from all over. I think, the diversity in business has been touched on a lot and the sports bar was brought up today, but I think a really big thing would be a reason for families to be coming to downtown Clayton. So like a children's museum, an arcade, like something that would be like a whole family event, which I know the city of Clayton's not necessarily going to be in charge of that, but somehow finding a way to try to recruit more reasons for more diversity than what we currently see.
We are getting a couple ice cream stores.
Okay.
Fingers
that's exciting.
crossed.
Where?
The one's hopefully opening up right next to Sushi AI, which will be great. It's like more gelato focused. And then an ice cream and kind of candy place is opening up where Posh Nosh was.
Yeah, it's Sylvie D's, and I believe they have one in Webster or something like that already, and they're opening another one. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That
I've
will
never
be
been,
nice
but I've
for
seen that on
families.
social
And I mean, I would think all those WashU students that are at Sushi AI will appreciate the ice cream next door.
Totally.
So,
I love that.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So fingers crossed that all, you know, you hear about things and then hopefully it will pan out.
Yeah.
That'll be nice.
You know what? I have a coffee. And you can, if you go to a restaurant, I used to go to when Mom was there. Well, because obviously it wasn't gonna take up.
Well, I think the ice cream place might They're definitely gonna have the gelato place, because it's kind of an unusual, it's not like just gelato. They have different, I think they have like acai bowls and stuff, like breakfasty stuff too. But they might also have like coffee. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that, but yeah. Mhm. Mhm. But I was gonna,
Coffee at night, by the way.
I can take up one of her tables and chairs.
yeah.
No, just go to the counter like I do.
Hey. Right.
One person that just see me coming.
Kathy, can you turn your mic on?
Oh, yeah, sorry, thanks.
I'm just socially oblivious, so I just
Yeah.
walk up to the counter.
You can come in anytime you're up.
Thank you, thank you.
An inside track now, see.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll show you how to do it one night, Kathy.
Another thing I wanted to bring up was just the potential for, and this would be more of a long term, but like some statement piece that, you know, we have it in Carondelet, which I feel like a lot of people photograph, but like more art. I feel like anything that can be more Instagrammable, any reasons why people take photos and like tag, it's just what the world is about now. But that goes, I think, for more of an immediate. Kathy had mentioned the planters, and I do agree they're beautiful, but I think we could have more. I also think we could have some hanging. I think we could do more with like just lighting up some of the trees. Like I know we can't do the twinkle lights going across streets, but maybe we could just make it more cute with more simple, you know, one-off things or a street full of the trees having lights or whatever. And then the last thing I'll say before I push it on to Alex is for an event idea I thought would be fun is like picnic in the park, which I know that Clayton does sometimes, various different things, but I think with consistency in some of the programming and like lower cost ones like that, I think picnics are always so fun. Everybody's willing to do it. If there was just a date to do it that was like a standing date, the third Friday of the month or whatever, you know, something like that could be really almost no cost.
You mean
Yeah.
a series though, multiple times
A
throughout the
series.
year?
Yeah, I think a series would be ideal just so people could be in a routine of actually doing it. And then I think something like that could be advertised really easily through the school and would be more family oriented also.
Absolutely. I think the idea about family agenda is really a great idea. People who live in the Ward 1 area, which I refer to as Long Island as opposed to here, which is known as Manhattan, to come here. That we have some really interesting things. Artwork, there's a ton of artwork here. One of the things that's really interesting is the clouds as they move through our high rises. I spend a couple days a week driving from Coffee to my home on Brentwood. And the clouds, because of certain days based upon our weather, you know, we don't have a standard weather. Today we're 90, tomorrow it's 50. And that becomes an interesting way of creating art in an inexpensive way. As I'm driving here this afternoon, someone had set up a camera right on the corner across from Starbucks as to what they were doing or what pictures they're taking. Again, it's a good place to take pictures in our downtown area because we have some really good buildings and it's value add. I love the picnic idea. I love the idea of us being able to utilize some of our public spaces for families. Because let's face it, we have obligations, whether it's your children or your grandchildren, to do things with them. You want to. I know my wife wants to be with my grandsons like nobody's business. The only problem that she has is they all are in 5 different sports. Well, that doesn't really allow her to see them, but everybody wants to do that. And this is the perfect place for it because we do have Shaw Park and we have other open spaces that can be utilized for fun things. And whatever we come up with, we can publicize through every means that all of us have talked about. because what I'm learning is from Prop O, which is obviously on everybody's mind for the school district, I'm really finding out how social media has really influenced people relative to marketing. Because you can follow it with hard copies, you can follow it with videos, you can follow it with posting on, Facebook. But it becomes a normal for everybody to see it, and it reminds them. There's like today on Facebook, there's 2 or 3 Clayton things that are posted, and I'm writing them down in my calendar on my phone. That's an outcome that you want. And I'm an old example. Young people would be much, more astute than I am, but I'm affected by the communication. I'm a Facebook guy. I'm an email guy, but I'm 97 years old. Cammie's 32, so, she can do whatever she wants.
Close.
I do want to make sure that we give Tripp a chance to talk as well.
Yeah. I mean,
You bet. I was not at the last meeting. I apologize. And this wasn't worthy of tweaking the minutes, but I do only have 1 P at the end of my name. So under absent Tripp Straub, it's TRIP, just 1. That's for future reference only. I think lots of great discussion. The events, I love all of them except for Day of the Dead. I think it's a complete waste of money based on the metrics that you showed up there, Gary. As we were talking about parking, because I'm the chair of the Central West End Community Improvement District board down there. And so one of the reasons when Gary and I were first talking about me joining this group was, okay, well, I've got some experience from being down there. And I see a lot of our same headaches of what we have down there are the same headaches that we have here in Clayton, and parking's a large one. So I'm like a Google map lover, live in town and country. I will Google map my way home every day leaving Clayton because it's always different based on traffic. As it comes to social media and parking, when I just Google map Clayton, guess what? Ivy Cafe shows up, boom, right away. Top rated, Straub's Market shows up right away. I got to scroll in a little bit to find the parking garages, but they are there. And so, somebody was saying, well, when you're looking to go out to dinner, you're going to check the restaurant, Napoli. Where do I park at Napoli? But if we could either get St. Louis Parking, which seems to own a bunch of the garages in Clayton, or whoever through the city can use this Google Maps to maybe make those big P's more pronounced, like lots of the businesses are. I see Nate's, I see Nettie's Pizza Den. So people are purposely going in there and manipulating Google to make that show up more regularly or more boldly. And so perhaps for parking, because there is a lot of parking, as you kind of, zoom in a little bit, all these different parking garages start showing up. Now, how do you get people to use that? I do think, legit signage, physical signage, is important as well, because not everybody's going to use Google Maps, obviously. I don't know that I had anything. Every other one of the events I think is spectacular. Central Social Series sounds great. Restaurant Week obviously has been going on a long time. Great. Music and Wine, Jazz Festival, all that's phenomenal. I'm interested. I met with the Opera Theater folks because they're going to be my neighbor in a couple of years, I guess. And Gary, I know they've talked to you, and they were, they're just doing a lot of fact finding now. But at some point, since that is in our special business district, we probably ought to talk about what's going to happen down there. And again, I know that's a process, but other than that, that's really all I have.
Does anyone have anything else they want to add regarding that this week?
Okay.
Julie, if I can offer maybe what we'll do for next meeting then. So Kristen and I will take this feedback specifically about the events and take another stab at that. And then since the parking, the baskets, the valet, the art, the picnics, Google Maps, all that stuff kind of really falls into staff work or the special business district budget. We'll also have a presentation regarding that also, because one of the principal responsibilities of this organization is to make a recommendation to the mayor and city council on the use of the special business district funds. So we will attempt to have something for that too, which may carry over until May, just given the length of the discussion I anticipate. But, you know, hopefully either in the end of next month or in May that we would come up with both a recommendation for the special events and the special business district account also.
Sounds great. Does
I think
anyone
that's
else?
one of the other bonuses of gathering for either young adults or people of my age is music. The wine and music thing on Brentwood that's been there for a few years. I remember, I haven't been in a couple of years, but when I first was going, it was dynamite. It was fun. It was easy. We had a table, you know, where you could sit with 4 or 5 people and you knew people, either you went with them or you saw them there. And it was just a wonderful experience. And afterwards, I would go to one of my favorite restaurants to have dinner. I mean, what more could you ask? The car's already been parked, you know, really an outstanding advantage for Clayton to be able to have that kind of activity on the size of streets that we have.
I agree with that. Does anyone else have a comment before we wrap up?
I guess I've got one additional comment. Do we have so again, back to Central West End, we have a website, CWE Scene. The city of St. Louis doesn't run it. It's our own website. And all of the events having to do with Central West End right there are, that's one place. And when we talk about social media and influencers, everything gets pointed back to that website. So, you know, we've got a great list of events. Are all those on the city website, and or is it broken out to where maybe the special business district has their own little area of what's going on?
We have those all on the city website, Trip. A little bit different financing mechanism than the Central West End, where you guys, I think, are actually a separate taxing entity.
Yeah, agreed.
This one dates back longer than that. So this is actually, the special business district is actually a part of the city.
Mhm.
Is a little bit of the nuance, but I think that's still, I think what we're taking, one of the things we're taking away today is marketing and social media in particular. So we'll also get with David and have that discussion also for next month.
Great.
And I'm on the city website right now, and it's not like glaringly obvious where that calendar is. So we might want to consider moving it. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good, thank you. Appreciate
You
it.
bet.